Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for The Forsaken, which is episode 16 of season 1 of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek Deep Space Nine one episode at a time. In this video I cover the first season episode, The Forsaken. So The Forsaken is the episode in which a group of ambassadors come to the station and Sisko orders Bashir as the junior officer to take care of them and keep them away from him. One of the ambassadors is Lwaxana Troi, who becomes infatuated with Odo, and he tries to rebuff her advances, which are quite aggressive. Meanwhile, a probe comes through the wormhole and inputs a computer program onto the station's computers, which wreak havoc on the station's systems. This causes Odo and Lwaxana to become trapped in a turbolift, and where the two of them are awkward at first, but eventually they bond as Lwaxana comforts him as he needs to regenerate. Meanwhile, a fire breaks out that puts the three ambassadors' lives in danger, and Bashir saves them and is praised for doing so. O'Brien takes care of the computer program by figuring it out. It's kind of like a lost puppy that just wants attention, so he builds a sub-program that lets the program get all the attention it needs while not affecting the station's computers. So, this episode is what I would call not very good. So in the past, I've done, when there's a series of like bad episodes in a row or boring episodes in a row, I give it a label and put that on the title. For example, Next Generation, there was the stretch of boring, which was 4 boring episodes in a row. And Enterprise, eventually I'll get to the stretch of doom, which is like 6 absolutely terrible episodes in a row. And Voyager infamously has the Trilogy of Terror in season 3, which is something that the Star Trek fans had labeled it. However, I disagree with their choice of the Trilogy of Terror, because in my opinion they choose one really good episode, one mediocre episode, and one bad episode. So I don't really see that as the Trilogy of Terror. There's something that I will cover when I get to Voyager season 3, the real Trilogy of Terror, that is the real 3 terrible episodes in a row. So as I was looking at it, I realized that Deep Space Nine has their own Trilogy of Terror in season 1, which season 1 is the worst season of Deep Space Nine, much like season 3 is the worst season of Voyager. So yes, they have their own Trilogy of Terror in their own worst season, and I believe that it is these 3 episodes: Progress, If Wishes Were Horses, and then this episode, The Forsaken. And I'll have a patron comment who points out pretty much the same thing. However, I came to this conclusion before I read the comment, because it was obvious to me as I was reviewing it, like, oh, wait a second, there's like 3 episodes I really don't want to watch, 3 episodes I really don't want to review in a row. Now, I know a lot of people will disagree with this conclusion, because there's a sizable amount of people who like Progress and think it's a great episode, and there's a sizable amount of people who like this episode, think it's fairly good, fairly decent episode, which I disagree with those opinions on both accounts. I believe Progress, while being the least offensive of the 3 of what I'm calling DS9's Trilogy of Terror, is still not good. It's still incredibly boring. It's annoying, and has one of the worst get off my screen characters in the show, and it's not constructed very well, and I don't buy the character story for Kira. It's really not enjoyable to watch that episode. If Wishes Were Horses is in the top 5 worst episodes of Deep Space Nine. It's my number 14 in the worst episodes of the entire Star Trek franchise. It is abysmal and one of the worst Star Trek has ever done. followed by this episode, which isn't quite as bad as that, because I will admit there is some good character development for Odo in this episode. However, you have 3 terrible plots. You have 3 plots, A plot, B plot, and a C plot, and they all are bad. and so this one wouldn't make my top 5 worst of DS9, but it might make my top 10. Definitely would make my top 15. It's definitely really down there as far as quality goes in Deep Space Nine episodes, in my humble opinion. So even though I didn't officially call it the DS9's Trilogy of Terror, I didn't put it in the title like I did for other and introduce the episode with that title. But I have decided that that's what this is. This is the last episode in DS9's Trilogy of Terror. So there's 3 different plots, and I was trying to figure out which order I wanted to tackle the plots, and so I decided to go in order of the least offensive to the absolute worst, most terrible plot. So that means we'll start with, and I know these plots are like somewhat related, like they'll interchange whatever, so they're not like completely separate, but still they're mostly 3 separate plots. So I'll start with the least offensive, the one that bothers me the least, and that is, believe it or not, the pup storyline with the probe coming through the wormhole, even though by all accounts this is what I would call a meaningless anomaly BS, but in this case it's not an anomaly, to be fair. It's a probe, but it's the same thing. It's the same concept, the same basic thing. It's a meaningless subplot that is just there to create tension, and usually these are the worst, my least favorite aspects of an episode. There were plenty of episodes where I pointed out that it had this meaningless subplot that's just there to create tension, that's often like dragging the episode down. However, it really showcases when an episode is really bad, when I actually prefer the meaningless subplot to the actual story. That tells you how bad an episode actually is, and that is the case with this episode, because this is the least offensive, because the other 2 storylines, which I'll get to shortly, are actively annoying and actively anger me, whereas this one is just, it's just another forgettable, meaningless plot that nobody cares about, that is just there to create tension. Now, in a good episode, that would absolutely be the worst part of the episode and drag it down, but in a bad episode, it's actually the least offensive part. So we have the storyline, and there's really not much to say about this storyline, because it is just what it is. It's just there to create tension. They need a reason for the systems to fail, which will affect the other 2 plots. And so they came up with this random storyline of a probe has a computer program that acts like a puppy. Now, I will say the worst parts of this storyline, it would be the beginning, where O'Brien's talking about the computer as his arch enemy, which is kind of funny, and I like the nuance of O'Brien can sense that the computer has an attitude or has a certain personality that most other people would, like Cisco has, like, what the hell are you talking about? It's just a computer. But since O'Brien is chief of operations and has to deal with the computer on a daily basis, I do get that he would notice like these slight personality. You can say it has a personality at the start of the episode when O'Brien's trying to do this maintenance thing and the computer's actively fighting him and shuts the thing down, and he gets really pissed off with it. So I'm with that. Like, that part of it I do kind of like, but what I really don't like is when he's talking to Cisco about, this is my arch enemy, I think they just make it over the top. And for one thing, it's totally inconsistent with what we've seen in season 1 so far. We haven't seen the computer outside of the pilot episode when O'Brien had to fight the computer to get the station to move, which kind of makes sense because the station isn't designed to move. It's not a spaceship. It's not designed to fly, so it makes sense that the computer would fight him on that one. But outside of that, we hadn't really seen any tension between O'Brien and the computer. And so this seems to kind of come out of nowhere and be kind of inconsistent with what we've seen. And also O'Brien's being a bit melodramatic by saying this is my arch enemy, and it was obviously done to create a plot in the story, and where we see the difference that once Pup comes on board, that it's all nice and friendly and it's easy to get along with, yet it keeps sabotaging systems. And so the whole idea of this alien computer program that just wants attention, they say it's not necessarily sentient, which is why they relate it more to a puppy or a dog more than an intelligent life form. But still, it's, I don't know, how does that even work though? Is it considered, but they consider it more of a life form than computer program? I don't know. They don't really get into it, and I believe that you're not meant to really think about it. It's just there to, to create tension, to have excuses of why the station will malfunction. So most of the scenes involving this are just kind of boring, and O'Brien talking to Dax and treating it like it's a lost puppy and trying to figure out. Like that scene when they're trying to disconnect they're trying to push it out and they're disconnecting everything and the computer's talking funny attempting lick up, stand by. That scene was mildly entertaining, I guess, or there was some tension, involved in that scene. But the one thing I kept thinking while I was watching that scene is, would the computer really be the computer voice be acting like that? And that, I don't know, it seems kind of like 90s-ish to me. The way 90s computers would react. I don't really buy that 24th century technology would react in the same way. But anyway, I did kind of like how they didn't, they had to push the pup. When they tried to push the pup out, it wouldn't go, and they had to actually accommodate it and do a good thing for it in order to get it to leave. That actually makes a degree of sense, but again, it doesn't really sustain a whole storyline. So that's that storyline down. So let's get to the second storyline, which I could call the second least offensive or the second most offensive storyline. I think I'd rather say the second most offensive storyline. I think that makes more sense in this case, and that is the Lwaxana Troi storyline. Now, this is the one storyline most people would point to as being the good storyline. I've watched a couple reviews where they said this storyline was really good, but the other ones were crap. I obviously disagree. Now, this is something I bring up, I think, every single time I cover an episode with Lwaxana Troi. I bring this up, and so I understand those who follow my channel might be really sick of me saying this, but it's relevant here, and I'm sorry, but I really do need to bring it up again. And that's the fact that Lwaxana Troi has no business being in Deep Space Nine. That all of the episodes of DS9 that she's in are the worst Lwaxana Troi episodes. She's actually somewhat enjoyable and can be fine in TNG. So her appearances in TNG are way better than her appearances in Deep Space Nine. The reason why I feel compelled to bring this up, because there is a sizable group of wrong people who are objectively wrong, who go around saying that her DS9 appearances are better than their TNG appearances, which is objectively wrong. She has no business being in Deep Space Nine, and her appearances are terrible. Like, outside of Manhunt, which is a TNG episode, and that is the worst Lwaxana Troi episode in existence, outside of that episode, her 3 DS9 episodes are the worst episodes that have her in it. And she actually has some fairly good episodes in TNG. Half a Life is a really good episode. Dark Page is a pretty good episode, which we'll be coming up on shortly. Cost of Living is actually really good. Now, granted, a lot of people seem to despise that episode. I actually think it's okay. I actually thought it was pretty funny, unlike this episode. And then Haven. I actually kind of like Haven, too. I think that, now that's more of the okay category, but still probably the good side of okay is fine. And then Menage a Troi is just fine. And then you got the 3DS9 episodes, and then you got Manhunt, which are all terrible. And so, it just boggles my mind how anyone could think her DS9 appearances are better than her TNG appearances. I will never understand that. Besides the fact that she has no business being on Deep Space Nine. Now, this episode, they do kind of make it work, because there's a group of ambassadors visiting, and so she's an ambassador. Okay, I get that. That's fine. But her other 2 appearances, she just shows up in order to say hello to Odo. Yeah, I don't know. I don't really buy that she has that big of a connection with Odo. They had one bonding moment in the Turbolift. Now, here's the thing. A lot of people will say, oh, well, this is actually really good. There was a really nice, touching moment with Lwaxana and the Turbolift with Odo. Now, I will get to that, because that is the one scene I had the least problems with. I actually did understand why people like it, and I think it is actually kind of good, and there's some things about that scene that work. The problem is, that is one scene out of this entire storyline. I think for people who say that the entire storyline is good because of one scene are wrong, because the rest of the storyline outside of that one scene is absolutely terrible. Now, I mentioned Manhunt as being the worst appearance of Lwaxana Troi, and if you want to know my feelings on that, you can watch my review for that. That was number 11 on my top 25 worst episodes of the entire Star Trek franchise, if I remember correctly. And one of the main issues that I had with that episode is that it was about Lwaxana Troi being super horny and sexually harassing all these random men on the Enterprise who very obviously did not reciprocate her feelings towards them. And I also said how it makes no sense why someone as attractive and wealthy as her would waste her time chasing after men who clearly are not interested in her. That's why I really liked the episode Half a Life, because in that case, she actually went after someone who actually did reciprocate her feelings. And I'm like, why doesn't she do that more often? And also, it's very creepy, actually, when you think about it. And if you do a gender reversal on this and you have a male in this role, it would not be acceptable and be seen as obviously creepy. Now, granted, there are some older movies from the 80s and 90s that do actually do that with male characters. But in a modern perspective, when we go back and watch those movies, we're like, ew, that did not age well. But no one really says it about the Lwaxana Troi stuff, which they should. Because she does the exact same thing in this episode that she did in Manhunt. Instead of it being Picard, and then Riker, and then some random hologram, and then going around hitting on everyone else, including like Geordi and Worf. Instead of that, it is just Odo. But it's just as creepy, just as bad. Her encounter with him in the security office, where she practically almost forces herself on him, where he very obviously is not interested in her and does not reciprocate these feelings, and she keeps harassing him. I'm sorry, but this, not only is it creepy and uncomfortable, they're trying to make it out like it's funny too. That's my biggest issue. The same thing in Manhunt. Oh yeah, she's trying to force herself on Picard. Isn't that hilarious? And they're doing the same thing here with Odo. She's sexually harassing Odo and making him uncomfortable. That's hilarious. No, it isn't. I don't find it funny. And we had the scene where Lwaxana goes to Sisko in his office and tells him, like, we have a problem. And Sisko laughs it off, like, what's wrong with that? And Sisko then says, have you ever thought about letting her catch you, Odo? Okay, so let's do a gender reversal on this scene. Let's say it was Major Kira or Dax. Let's stick with Major Kira, who goes to Sisko, and she is saying, this ambassador, this old man, is harassing me, going around making sexual advances and trying to get with me, and I want to handle this situation delicately because I know he's an ambassador, but this is unacceptable. What should I do? And Sisko's response would not be, have you ever thought of letting him catch you? In fact, there is a specific example, if I'm just going to cross over to the other storyline real quick, but there's a specific example in the other storyline that proves this, because Sisko is telling Bashir a story about when he was younger and he was forced to look after ambassadors, that he punched an ambassador for trying to coerce a young lady to go to his room against her will. So we know how Sisko would react if the genders were reversed. We know that he would not be okay with the man making sexual advances towards Kira. We know this. I mean, I don't know if he would go as far as to punch him. Maybe if he got like physical with her, although Kira can take care of herself, so can Dax. So let's just say a random younger random ensign on board who maybe wouldn't be able to, less experience, and wouldn't handle herself around this towering man who's sexually harassing her. Sisko would punch him. He might even punch him, and he would take it way more seriously. He would be like, yeah, this is unacceptable. You stop taking care of him right now. I'm going to separate you from this ambassador so you don't have to take care of him anymore. And that would be that. But with Odo, he's like, why don't you just let her catch you? When it's fucking clear from their conversation that Odo is not interested in her. And I get it, they're trying to make this more about the fact that Odo's a shapeshifter they don't really use the word changeling yet, so I'll just say shapeshift. That he's a shapeshifter, and he's different and doesn't actually see any point in the mating rituals of human beings, and they make it about that, and Odo goes off on this tirade. It's like, not interested in your stupid mating rituals. But that's actually really irrelevant. That's actually really beside the point. It doesn't matter why Odo is not interested in her. The fact of the matter is, he is not interested in her. And Sisko is being very disrespectful towards him by not taking this seriously and just being dismissive about it. Now, I do realize for those Babylon 5 fans out there that there actually is a storyline in Babylon 5 that is like that with I think Ivanova, the first officer on that show, where she is being sexually harassed by this old ambassador dude, and she has to try to be tactful about it. And what she ends up doing is ridiculous. Like, she says, oh, okay, I'll have sex with you. And then what she called sex is like, she just goes around, says all these funky things. She's like, goes whoo ba 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 or whatever, and does a really weird dance. And like, oh, that's what humans consider sex. And to be clear, I hated that storyline too. I talked about this when I covered Babylon 5. I thought that storyline was creepy and unacceptable as well. So I'm fairly consistent about this. Anyway, so I just, that scene angered me. Anyway, but once we get into the Turbolith with Odo and Lwaxana, let's leave aside everything I just said about the sexual harassment. Let's say that actually I'm overthinking things and it's actually fine and I'm making a big deal out of nothing. Let's just leave that aside for the moment. Odo and Lwaxana being trapped in an elevator is the trapped in an elevator cliche. And that cliche is terrible, is overused, and it's never done for any effect. It's obviously meant to be funny how Lwaxana keeps like talking to Odo when he clearly doesn't want to talk to her, and she's like going overboard, and when he tells her to be quiet, she eventually says, I'm sorry, Odo, I can't, I need to. And so he lets her talk, and she rambles on and on and on, and Odo's like counting the bolts in the floor or something like that. And that's supposed to be funny. And it's not the least bit funny. It is actively annoying. It is terrible. It is the trapped in an elevator cliche at its worst. Even if we just totally forget about the sexual harassment thing. Even if that didn't exist. The whole trapped in an elevator cliche is not good. And it's amazing to me that people would actually like that. Now, to get to the one good scene in the episode is when she gets Odo to open up about his past. Now, we do actually get some also character building for Odo that will be with him for the rest of the series, such as the fact that he got his hairstyle from the Bajoran scientist who studied him. This isn't the episode where they explain the origins of his name. I think that comes later, but they did explain that he was grew up in a laboratory essentially and was a test subject, and that eventually he like performed and did tricks at parties, and he hates parties because of that. Like, that's good character building. So I could see why some people would latch on to that one thing and be like, oh, this is a good storyline because we get some great character building from Odo. Like, and that's the only reason why I didn't have this as the worst storyline of this episode, by the way. And then the scene where Lwaxana like opens up to him, takes her wig off, and says, look, I also put on an act, and I'm opening up to you, and you don't have to be shy. You can actually, regenerate. And okay, so that's lovely. Like, that's nice. That's a nice little moment. But I don't think that one nice little moment earns all the crap they had to do to build up to just one moment. I'm sorry, but I would be perfectly willing to not have that moment if I didn't have to endure all the bullshit it took to get there. And that is just me. And also, they had some contrived suspense melodrama where they had a scene where Odo, or on Ops, where Cisco and Kira were talking about Odo being trapped in the turbolift, and Kira asked, or Cisco asked Kira how long till Odo needs to regenerate, and Kira's like, well, that I have no idea. So they were playing into it, oh my god, he's got to regenerate, this is terrible. But really, also, he doesn't need to be in this bucket. He just does that, so he doesn't spill everywhere. He can regenerate wherever he wants. So that's and the way they play it off it's this huge, oh my god, it's a ticking clock, but it's actually not, because he just, I don't know, who really cares? They're making a big deal out of nothing. And it makes me think of the promo for this episode. Now, I think it's partly a shame because I'm watching DS9 on DVD, that they don't have the promos, because I'm also watching TNG, but that's on Blu-ray, and they have the episode promos that originally aired when the episode came out that you can watch right before the episode, and I'm kind of missing the ones for DS9. However, I used to watch these all the time when they first came out. In fact, I remember making a videotape compilation of all the promos, and I would watch them a lot, so I still have them stuck in my head. And I remember the promo for this episode was they made a big deal. They had played the suspenseful music, and it's Odo is being trapped in the elevator, and they played the scene with Kira saying, oh, I have no idea how long his regeneration cycle is, and they played it da da da, huge suspenseful music. Yeah, but I know that's just the promo, but still, even within the episode itself, I think they dramatize this way too much. And then the scene at the end where Lwaxana goes her separate ways and suddenly stops harassing Odo for I don't know what reason, but Odo says, she says, oh, maybe I'll look you up and show you a good time or something like that, and he smiles when she walks away. I know they had this touching bonding moment in the turbolift, but I don't buy that. I still don't buy that. This episode is basically Manhunt light, which is why I cannot get behind it. Just because of one nice scene, a character building scene with Odo, does not mean this is a good Lwaxana Troi episode. It's still one of the worst. So, that's that storyline done. So now let's get into the worst storyline of the episode. And yes, there is a storyline I think that's even worse than Lwaxana Troi, and that, of course, the only one left, Bashir taking care of the ambassadors. This is I want to say this is a syndicated 80s show or early 90s syndicated goofy show, but I think that's giving this storyline too much credit. I want to say that it's a cartoon, but again, I think that's giving this storyline too much credit. It is, I don't know what to compare it to, because it's worse than anything I can think to compare it to, but it is childish. It is idiotic. It is dumb. It makes Cisco come off as an asshole. It turns Federation ambassadors into cartoonish caricatures. It is goofy as all hell, and then the ending of it is utterly ridiculous and unbelievable. So first of all, the whole storyline with Bashir having to look after these annoying ambassadors. I don't buy that these ambassadors, the ambassadors are cartoonish caricatures, as I say, so I don't buy that they'd be that annoying. And why does Cisco assume, he seems to assume that, because he talked about in the past how he had to look after annoying ambassadors, he assumes that looking after ambassadors is a terrible job, and it's annoying, and they just treat you like shit. Now, I could buy that maybe per the, probability of chances that Bashir just so happens to have to look after the 3 most annoying ambassadors in the Federation. And they just so happen to all come together at the same time to come to the station. That is very unlikely, but I can buy it. What I don't buy is that every single ambassador in the Federation behaves this way. I do not buy that. Not at all. Now, granted, some, like Lwaxana, would be really self-entitled and self-important, but I'm sure there'd be some really, nice... We've seen a lot of ambassadors on Star Trek that are very polite and very nice, or at least maybe I'm thinking of Riva. He was very self-important, self-righteous, but he wasn't annoying to be around. He was still polite to the other people. Well, he was more of a mediator than an ambassador, but still same kind of deal. So I simply don't buy that because that one ambassador guy, and he was a Federation ambassador in the episode The Price. He was a really cool guy. He was a nice guy to be around. He was fun. If Bashir was assigned to look after him, they'd be sitting there playing poker and having jokes and stuff. So I don't buy this, that Sisko's acting like he's saying, oh, when I was an ensign or lieutenant, I had to look after all these stupid ambassadors and they annoyed the piss out of me. Now it's your turn to do it. I don't buy that the Federation is full with annoying-ass ambassadors. As I said, it's hard enough, I can just barely buy that there just so happens to be 3 annoying ambassadors that all just so happen to visit the station at the same time. So this is a ridiculous premise that you're having to really suspend disbelief to follow this premise to begin with. And the scenes we get with the ambassadors constantly annoying the hell out of Bashir, and Bashir making shit up is oh, they're doing a recalibration of every system, and then the Vulcan ambassador is I would like to see this recalibration. This is supposed to be funny, it's supposed to be humorous, but for me, I'm just thinking this is so dumb, I don't find any of it the slightest bit funny. And then when the ambassadors show up to ops and they're harassing Sisko or whatever, and Sisko, he's being really unprofessional, I think, in this episode. Granted, he's having to deal with cartoon caricatures that shouldn't even exist, but it kind of makes him more of a caricature himself, the way that the ambassadors show up on ops, and when he has, his back is turned to him where they can't see him, he makes a face oh, God. It's the most painful, worst thing ever, and he turns around, oh, hello. Now, granted, as someone who's worked in customer service, I get that. I definitely get that. But I don't buy that he treats every single Federation ambassador like this. He would be very bad at his job. He would be very cantankerous. Imagine if Picard treated every single Federation ambassador, because Picard smiles welcome aboard ambassadors, being very polite and friendly, but when his back is turned they can't see him, he's still smiling and being polite and friendly. He doesn't make a face oh, God damn. So this comes, I know Sisko's different than Picard, but this is making him different in the terms of making him bad at his job as opposed to Picard. So that is not good for Sisko's character, and it's not good for the show. But anyway, so jumping to the scene where the fire breaks out and Bashir saves them lives, this is probably when they come and finally rescue them. This is the most ridiculous, cartoonish, unbelievable, unrealistic, unearned, two-dimensional, not funny BS that I've seen in the entire show. Where the ambassadors who moments before were berating Bashir over the most trivial shit were forced to be stuffed into a tightly confined Jeffries tube, come out and are like, oh, I'm okay thanks to Julian. Oh, thank you, Julian. I'm gonna put this young man up to an accommodation. He is so great. They almost died. They were trapped in a fire and they were confined in a tiny space. Now, I'm not saying that they wouldn't be grateful for Bashir for saving his lives, although there is an argument to be made considering how cantankerous and, cartoonishly annoyed and unhappy they were at everything. There's a good argument to be made that they wouldn't even give Bashir the credit for saving his lives. Instead, would just complain about having to be in be shoved into a Jeffries tomb. But even if you leave that aside, even if you say that they are grateful to Bashir, that would not be the first thing on their mind after being saved, after they're being finally released from the Jeffries tube and they're free. The first thing would be like, take me to the infirmary, I'm sick, oh my god, that was horrible. Maybe if they were going to keep in character, they would be yelling at Cisco and being like, what kind of fucking station that you're running here? This fire broke out and you had this young Starfleet officer that thankfully did the job correctly and saved our lives, otherwise we could have died, thanks to you. Like, that would have been if they were keeping in character. But regardless of that, even if they weren't cantankerous, the first thing out of their mouths wouldn't be, I'm giving this young man accommodation. It would be, fucking terrible, I almost died, take me to the infirmary. It is so cartoonish. I think this is the least believable scene in the entire show of Deep Space Nine. I really do. And that is a bold statement considering their episodes like Prophet and Lace and Bada Bing Bada Bang coming up. And The Muse, speaking of Lwaxana Troi. And even considering that, I stand by this is probably the most unrealistic scene in the entire show. It is so cartoonish, so much of a caricature, so poorly written. I'm sorry, I think if I just talk about this anymore, I'll just be thinking of other words to throw insults. You get the point. You get the point of how flat and two-dimensional this is, but I just really feel like I really need to emphasize that this storyline sucks. Anyway, I would now like to thank everyone who supported me on Patreon. It's very much appreciated. It does help me continue with the channel. I'd like to give a real big special thanks to Brandon Neilhouse and Antarius. Thank you both so very much for your strong support. I would also like to give a shout out to Greg Marley, Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky, Matty Jester, Joel Valls, Alessandro Miguelicio, Norman Buchwald, Stephen Kennedy, Britton Berg, and Allison Fordyce. Thank you all so very much for your support. So we do have a few patron comments on this episode. First comment is from Stephen Kennedy, who says, awful episode. The only part of this episode that is good is the turbolift scene when Lwaxana Troi acts like a normal person. So my rating is 2. I couldn't be bothered writing anything out of 10. You know, I don't blame you for not being bothered to write anything. This episode is not worthy of that kind of attention. Anyway, next comment is from Kyrie091, who says, The Forsaken, more like poor lame sin. While I don't like this episode, I remember actually liking Lwaxana's interaction with Odo. It was nice seeing something kind of moving from her beyond just flirting and embarrassing Deanna. But, by the way, how did Deanna get her distinct accent when her mom sounds nothing like that? Who taught Deanna how to talk? Anywho, little one, this was okay at best. With a really moving scene towards the end, I give it a rating of 6 Vic Fontaines out of 10 endgames. Now, I would say 6 out of 10 is way too high of a rating for this episode, but then again, you said 6 Vic Fontaines out of 10 endgames, and that sounds like an absolutely terrible rating. So I agree with the rating. But anyway, I think they actually did answer in an episode of TNG. I can't remember which one. That it was one of Lwaxana's helpers. Like, you know how she has Mr. Home? It was like someone who was there before Home who taught Deanna, who had spoke with that accent and taught Deanna how to speak, and that's where she picked up the accent from. Because the funny thing is, in the episode of The Dark Page, which is coming the following season, we meet Deanna's father, and he also doesn't have an accent. Now, the real out-of-universe answer to this question is that when Marina Sirtis was first coming up with Deanna Troi, she has a British accent, and they were thinking that they didn't want Deanna to just have a flat-out British accent, and rather than having her put on an American accent, they decided that she would just make up her own accent, and they call it a Betazoid accent, and they would assume that everyone from Betazoid talks like that. But then they forgot about that when they introduced Lwaxana, probably mainly because she's, you know, Gene Roddenberry's wife and she's royalty, and so they didn't want to have her put on a fake accent. They didn't want to restrain her performance, so they just had her speak normally. And then when they introduced other Betazoids at that point, it was like, yeah, cat's already out of the bag. And so that's the real answer to why their accents are nothing alike. Honestly, I don't think that's any worse than in Star Trek Picard Season 3, where they try to say Beverly Crusher's son, who was raised by her alone, has a complete British accent because he went to like a British school or something like that. It's no worse than that. Anyway, next comment is from Norman Buckhold, who says, outside the moment where Lwaxana shows off her vulnerability and removing her wig and keeping Odo on her lap, the rest of this episode is definitely absolutely horrendous. What happened to Pup at the end of Season 5 when they deliberately destroyed all the computers and data on them before giving the station to the Cardassians? Did Miles O'Brien have the foresight to keep Pup on some type of hard flash drive? The rest is unwatchable, yes. I've already been criticized from Mark for liking Q less than this episode, although probably both are about the same. At least on the first episode, and if a one-shot in Lwaxana, I do buy her falling for Odo as she cannot read her mind, or read his mind, and that has been consistent. She seems to be drawn to non-Ferengi guys she cannot read, as first established with her crush on the hologram in that horrendous Lwaxana episode known as Manhunt. But unfortunately, Lwaxana returned, and I just have trouble buying her returning to just be around Odo. At least Picard, there was a reason for her return. There's just something hanging out there of her and Odo that will never quite fit right after this. The Bashir storyline is unwatchable. Let the diplomats die. They deserve it. 2 lame, stuck in the turbolift sitcom style plots out of 10. Well, yeah, so I didn't criticize you for liking Q less in this episode. I was just pointing out that I personally disagreed. Not exactly the same thing, but you do say that you think they're both the same for you, so fair enough. But yeah, everything else, is stuff I absolutely completely agree with. And yes, Deanna Troi has no business to keep returning to DS9, and TNG, her daughter's there. That's the reason. You trying to say that her relationship with Odo is strong enough for her to want to keep going back to him? What? Because she annoyed the hell of him and obviously kept rejecting her and obviously wanted nothing to do with her, and she ignored that. But then eventually they had one nice bonding moment, and now she's forever bonded to him. Anyway, next comment is from Antarius. He says, we're in a really terrible stretch of episodes. This stretch deserves a name like the Stretch of Doom or Boring. Again, I can't decide which plot I like less. Of course, we never hear of this computer program again. The ambassadors were such a cliche. The scenes in the turbolift were okay, but they can't save this episode from being awful. My rating is a 2 out of 10. So I called it the DS9's Trilogy of Terror. So taking that from the term Trilogy of Terror that's used in Voyager. So I'm saying this is DS9's Trilogy of Terror. But yeah, totally agree with you. I know not everyone will agree with that, but I'm glad to see some people do. So a few things that you touch on that actually Norman touched on as well, such as the computer program, as Norman brought up. Did it die when they had to destroy the computers at the end of Season 5 when the Dominion took over the station? And my answer to that is yes. I don't think O'Brien had the foresight to put any safeguards in place. I don't think he gave a shit about Pup. I think that they were just like, oh, well, fuck it, it's going to die. So I don't think they cared. They just killed it. It was just an annoying thing that was just annoying the hell of them in the first place. They would have been happy to kill it. But anyway, but the real answer is the producers totally forgot about this episode and never wanted to follow up on it again, which I gotta say, I can't really blame them for that. And also, I thought Norman's comment about letting the ambassadors die was hilarious. I think it's not unearned. Anyway, or it's not wrong, is what I'm saying, what I should say. But anyway, next comment is from Ricky, who says, God damn, does this episode suck. I mean, every plot, from A with Lwaxana to B plot of the 3 asshole diplomats treating Bashir like shit, to C plot of the irrelevant and inconsequential story of Pup, who is never acknowledged or mentioned ever again after this episode. Lwaxana should never appear in the show. I'm sorry, but she is horrible in these 3 episodes that she appears, and don't even get me started on the Muse. Hashtag fuck the Muse. Now, the scene where she reveals to Odo her vulnerability was okay, but not enough to save this episode. The 3 diplomats was incredibly hard to watch and so fake when Bashir saves one of them and they were like, oh, I was wrong, he is okay, was so, sorry, my glasses are failing me here, so fake. And the Pup storyline was a waste of time, especially knowing it's never mentioned again. It is pointless. So my rating is a 2 out of 10. Yeah. I mean, absolutely agree. Lwaxana has no business on being Deep Space Nine, and 100% hashtag fuck the Muse. Absolutely. I do think the Muse is worse in this episode. Because, yes, you had that one nice scene with Odo's character building. At least that saved it. Where the Muse, yeah, even worse than this episode. So, and Fascination is not that much behind this episode either. I don't know which one I think is worse. This one, I actually think this is worse than Fascination, to be honest. But I'll get to Fascination when I get to it. All 3 of her DS9 appearances were terrible, and she had no business being on the show. Can't say that enough. Her TNG appearances were much, 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 much better. It's like comical to me that people would even say that her DS9 appearances were better than her TNG ones. I'm sorry, I just repeat myself over and over again, but I have to because it's so true. Anyway, thank you, patrons, so much for your comments. So my rating for The Forsaken out of 10 is going to be a 2, extremely poor. So, yeah, I was very tempted to give this episode a 1. I think it deserves it. But I think the character building with Odo, we get the background of that he was raised by a scientist, and it was a nice little character moment. They had a little bonding moment where she opened up to him. That saves it from getting a 1. And the fact that the pup storyline, that wasn't completely offensive on its own, but the ambassador storyline was. And the Lwaxana Troi one was as well, minus that one scene, that one brief moment. So I'll be very generous and give it a 2 instead of a 1, much like all my Patreon supporters who seem to also give it a 2 out of 10. So anyway, that is it for my review of The Forsaken. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to leave a like and leave a comment with your thoughts on the episode as well. It helps me in the algorithm. And if you really want to support my channel, you can support me on Patreon. I'll have a link to my Patreon page below. There are different tiers with different rewards. There are pre-releases, and there are also exclusive to Patreon videos that I make where I revisit reviews that I've already done, so you can check that out in the link below. Otherwise, just leaving a like and all that also really helps the channel as well. So let's see what's coming up next on my channel. Thursday will be my review for Dramatis Personae, which I believe is how you pronounce it. I had looked this up yesterday. Anyway, I'll be reviewing that episode on Thursday. Saturday will be my review for Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power Season 2. Monday, I'll be over on Patreon, as I said, doing a exclusive Patreon video revisiting my review for Duet, one of the best Star Trek episodes ever made. And then on Wednesday, sticking on Patreon, doing another revisited, this time revisiting my review for Timescape. So that's what's coming up on my channel. Be sure to check it out as I continue to cover Star Trek Deep Space Nine and Star Trek Next Generation and many other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.